This looks like a replica of one of the stations.
Well, pretty much. This room is filled with a lot of different history portraying the different aspects of the Pony Express and the time period that they were in existence. We have a nice mural back here that kind of shows the trail and kind of what the rider would have looked like hopping from one horse to another with his mochila. And they didn't take very much time. They could do it in 30 seconds because time was money. They had a total of 2 minutes to change horses.
Well, this guy's grabbing the one and he jumped off the,
and
fresh one.
He never, this gentleman here, and this is an accurate portrayal, most of the riders, you know, when they were just changing horses, never put their foot on the ground.
Wow.
They just switched from one horse to another with the mochila. And speaking of mochila, in case anybody doesn't know or isn't familiar with the word, it really is a Spanish word for sack or knapsack, and the reason why a mochila like this was used to carry the mail was, again, because of time. You couldn't take the time to take a saddle off of a horse that had a sack attached to it. You would just take this off of one saddle and put it on another, and then the mail was locked in 4 compartments here.
Now this was an actual one or a replica? Or?
Actually, this is a replica. There aren't any ones that we know of left in existence.
Oh.
Because think about it. These guys, these Pony Express riders, were riding on these 24 hours a day. They got a lot of abuse. They saw rain, sleet, snow, you know, and so nothing would be left of those today. But this one is an older one that was made for our re-rides that we do every year to reenact the Pony Express.
Well, this is a great room.
A lot
of things in here.
Well, for our guests that come and visit, this is usually where they start out, and sometimes we don't see them exit the room for nearly 30 minutes because there's so much information in here.
Well, it looks like an Olympic torch.
Well, yeah, and that's very interesting. We have a history that is modern as well. We were given the privilege of being the first torch bearers to carry the torch 24 hours a day. It was never carried 24 hours a day in the Olympic preliminary ceremonies by anybody else but the Pony Express riders. And when we got to a town, we would then hand it off to a runner so the runner could run it through a major town that had, a lot of population coming out to see the torch running through. But then the torch was given to a Pony Express rider, and they would ride it to the next, to the next town.
That's brilliant.
It was a lot of fun to be involved in, and that was the Atlanta Games that we were involved in. 1996 Atlanta Games. That was a great privilege.
That's great. And you said that's a Remington picture?
Yeah, that's a replica of a Remington drawing portraying a Pony Express station out in the Midwest. Could have been Kansas, could have been Nevada, if you could see the terrain behind the station.
Well, I used to live in Oklahoma, and Remington was everywhere, and I absolutely fell in love with Remington. So
well, he fell in love with the West, so he portrayed a lot of great Pony Express, both sculptures and paintings.
Well, you have some great paintings in here. This tile is unbelievable.
Oh, that shows you what it was like when they had to go through Indian territory. Because, you have to stop and wonder, why were the Indians so interested in these riders? They wanted to capture the riders because they wanted to see what was in that mochila that was so important that the rider would give his life for, would protect that with his life. Now, we lost one rider, as the legend goes, and separately we lost a mochila. But that was all that ever happened during the 18 months to a rider or to a mochila due to Indians. I mean, they were shot, but no other rider was killed. But when the mochila was captured that one time, it was found about a year or two later, I believe. And it was found intact with all of its mail in it. And we can only imagine that once the Indians found out what was in it, it wasn't valuable to them. So
Makes sense.
I'm sure they were still confused as to why our riders protected that with their life.
Well, that's, you died for our honor.
Yeah, and the mail was very important in those days. The Pony Express was successful in making sure that they got from point A to point B in 10 days. They ran 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Up until that point, in 1860, the quickest form of mail delivery was by stagecoach, which took 24, 25 days if the stagecoach arrived. Because remember, they carried people with money and bullion, and they were robbed on a regular basis. Couldn't always go 24 hours a day. But when we were pretty sure we were going to get into the war between the states, we had to find a quicker way to get important information out west, because President Buchanan was very fearful of losing the state and the territory, California with the gold, and the territory of Utah and later Nevada, to the Confederate sympathizers, because we had the silver and the gold. So that was the urgency, you know, to get messages and mail out west quicker.
Excellent. And what's this behind us? Is this
absolutely.
a replica of...
And this would have, yes, this would have been pretty much what a small bunkhouse would have looked like for a Pony Express rider. He didn't need much. He just needed a place to rest his head, cook his meals, and wait for the next mail to come through.
Well, unlike the old closet up at, the old cabin up at the other museum, you have a closet in this one.
Yeah, he has a closet in this one, yeah.
That's a modern one.
But yeah, so this, you get a better sense of what he did with his time while he was waiting for the mail to come back. And you know, these gentlemen worked for Russell, Majors, and Waddell, which the firm was known as the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company.
Oh, wow.
Better known as the Pony Express. But these men worked for them 24 hours a day. That's why they really couldn't have families. So it depended upon where their home station was, but then when they were not riding, when they were waiting for the mail to come back the other way, they had duties at that station. Now, when they didn't have anything to do, they had a Bible to read, because Mr. Majors, one of the three, was very religious, and everybody that worked for him received a Bible and took an oath that they would not drink, they would not swear, they would not quarrel or fight with anyone else in the firm, and they would not be cruel to the animals. And they were expected in their free time to read their Bible.
Wow, you're a great docent.
Well, I just enjoy being a docent. I don't know if
I was just
great.
thinking, you know, they come here to visit this museum, can they ask for a docent to give them a tour?
Absolutely, especially if groups want to come to this museum. All they have to do is say that they want a guided tour, and the Douglas County Historical Society will make sure that there are guides to take them personally through.
Because there's so much information just off this little room that it'd be great to have a docent.
Yeah, we could spend all day in here, but
I
we
know,
have more to see.
Yes. Well, are you ready to change rooms?
Yes, let's go. Let's go to the washout basket room.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Well, we're in the washout room, and this is unbelievable how beautiful these baskets are.
Oh, many people come to this museum just to see this room. We have a lot of wonderful baskets here. And the Washoe were the Native Americans that were indigenous to the Carson Valley and to this side of the Sierra Nevada. And this was their summer home, like Tahoe was their winter home. But what they are best known for is their beautiful basket weaving. And we're so fortunate to have one of the most famous basket weavers' baskets here, Dotsolale. She was well known throughout the United States. And we have one of her baskets here that people can come see. Many of her baskets are in the Smithsonian, believe it or not, Michael.
Wow, these are beautiful. Yeah, Dan, if you can't get all these baskets, then we'll just kind of...
And her basket, you know, we're so fortunate to have it, but that's not to take away from the other beautiful basket work and weaving that we have in this room. This is the Grace Dangberg Memorial Room. And Grace Dangberg, her family was one of the original settlers of the Carson Valley, very famous, wonderful benefactor. And she was head of the museum or the Historical Society for
I did not know that.
And an author, yeah, and she
Author?
was, yeah. But anyway, you can see some baskets here with, some are more utilitarian and some are fancier because they were more made to order from tourists that came to town. And then we have other things besides baskets, like this bee-hep stick. That was used for knocking pine nuts down out of the trees. So, and that was a staple for the Washoe.
Well, yeah, there's some grinding stones over here in the corner.
Yeah, and there's grinding stones over there to see, and that's basically, you know, those were the tools of the kitchen.
Yes, and that's what they They knocked them down and ate them. They're small little guys too.
Yeah, just very good. I mean, it takes a lot of work to make some, sort of dough or some bread out of that.
Oh yeah, this whole room is just set up perfect.
Oh, it is, and this is, like I said, this is a destination for many people who want to come here to the museum. Although we have a lot of, fantastic artifacts, this is a highlight for people.
Well, I like when they let the Washoe do their thing. This is honestly a good setup for the Indian heritage.
It is, and we still have a lot of Washoe presence here in the Carson Valley, and the Washoe elders work very closely with us.
Excellent.
So we're very fortunate to be able to know what we have and present it properly.
Well, they must be pretty proud of this room because this is well done.
Oh, I hope they are. Well, now you want to switch gears and see the original jail?
Sounds good. Well, Kim, this is absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to play here. This is like a jail.
It is
In the
not
jail.
like a jail, it's a real jail.
It's a jail. And then this is like pretty small jail and a pretty secure jail. You couldn't break out this thing if you wanted to.
Well, over the years, we had 1 or 2 inmates that were able to break through, and one broke out and went up west into the mountains and was recaptured.
They got out of this thing?
Out of this thing. And then the second one broke out through the top of there's 2 cells here, broke out through the top of that cell and broke through the ceiling and up into the courtroom. Well, they caught him in time, but the ceiling was lined with metal as well,
Yes.
or he couldn't tell because they were afraid that somebody would try to break out. So that did happen twice.
Well, that is awesome.
But this is the actual jail room to the courthouse after it was rebuilt after the 1910 fire.
So if you ended up in here, you're in trouble.
You weren't going anywhere, no you weren't. As a matter of fact, they didn't even let them outside to exercise or anything. This was also the exercise room.
Well, you said something about this ball. Is that something they tied to their ankles or something?
Absolutely. The old ball and chain joke. Well, that was literally a ball that they would tie, that they would secure to the prisoner's ankles, and they could use the restroom here. And then they had about a half an hour where they could exercise over there. Now, for the purposes of a museum, we've used the area on the other side of the room for a blacksmith exhibit, because we have a wonderful blacksmith exhibit that came from a ranch in Millerville.
Wow.
But over there, if you can imagine that exhibit not being here, that was where they were allowed to exercise.
Exercise in the black over here.
Yeah. Now,
Unbelievable.
nothing would have been there, obviously, at the time.
But this is awesome for a blacksmith.
So this was not comfortable like today's prisons or jail cells, by comparison.
I did a survivalist camp not too long ago, and I really think if anything went wrong with this country, the best place to go would be the museums.
Isn't that the truth?
You would get everything you needed to survive here
Absolutely.
at this museum. So you should come here just to learn how to survive in case anything goes wrong.
Yeah,
Because-
and that's a good, that's no joke, Michael.
No, these are all the tools you would need to survive are here.
Yeah, we try to explain and exhibit to the young people that come in what things were like before you had electronic games and devices, cell phones, even phones at times, television, radio. But if a disaster happened where everything electronic was unavailable to us, you could just go back to a museum and find out how things were done.
Well, you have the bellows, they're making things hotter. You got the old iron, is it iron or steel? Stove?
Yeah.
That's a big sucker too.
That would have been, it would have taken something that big to heat this room, because this room is all cement.
Well, that's for sure, yeah.
Yeah. No comforts in this room.
And then you said that's the sheriff, huh?
Well, that's the sheriff today. Over on this wall, actually, we have a nice display of the Douglas County sheriffs that we have photographs of, and all of their names are listed on a roll call there. So
Excellent.
if anybody comes to town who is related to a sheriff, and we've had people come in the museum when I was here, and it's, well, I was related to Sheriff Wyatt. Well, this would be a great place for them to come and see a little bit about what their ancestor had to deal with in their day-to-day work life.
Actually, I am related to a sheriff in a small town in Michigan.
Oh.
He was also the local dentist.
Oh,
so one time, one of those Bonnie and Clyde type people came to his town, and the alarm went off. So he got the gun off the side of his room with the patient still in the chair. He opened up and blasted the guy coming out of the bank. They went back to work on the guy in the dentist chair.
Well, you know, in these small towns, you had to wear many hats.
These are tough people, though. Tough people of the land, you might say.
Absolutely. You know, there were not a lot of what we would call modern conveniences at that time.
Well, this is so cool. You got leg irons, you got escape keys. Is that what they made to escape?
Yeah, different things that inmates use to try and get out of prison. And, you know, today they still do the same thing. Like you said, during the days of Bonnie and Clyde, they were always trying to find a way to escape. There were some that accepted their lot and were going to live out their sentence. And there were those that it was a challenge and a game to get free. You know, they were not going to stay imprisoned. And so here's proof that it even happened here in Genoa.
This is wild.
Well,
the oldest settlement in Nevada.
Oldest settlement in Nevada, absolutely.
The oldest jail in Nevada.
From at least 1865. Well, you know, it's not actually the oldest jail. At one time before we had this building here, the territorial enterprise started in this town in 1858, and then it was moved in 1859 to Carson City, 1860 up to Virginia City. But when it was here in this town, they used different buildings to house prisoners.
Wow.
And at one point, they were using the printing press of the territorial enterprise when it was on Mill Street to chain a prisoner, and one prisoner was left there for 2 days.
So people are working on the print press, and he's like tied to the
I can only imagine. So actually, when we're talking about modern conveniences, I imagine when they built this jail, that was a step up from being tied to a printing press.
I think so. What's these big pieces of rock for?
Well, this is a display that we have in here because we have the room, and because I don't have my glasses on, I'm not going to be able to help you with that.
Well, it just says it's imported from France, so I didn't know what it was. Stone, which was originally imported from France, came from the giant grist mill?
On Old Kingsbury Grade, yes.
Wow.
And that was the carry mill that the Thomas and Elsie Knott built. That was one of the first mills built here in Carson Valley.
So kids, when you come here and visit the original Genoa jail, teach your little brother to go inside. That's what I would do. Shannon, my sister, would be in there locked in about 2 seconds. This is cool stuff.
Yeah, it is, and it's another highlight of our guest visits to the Genoa Courthouse Museum.
So kids, come down and see the Genoa jail and have some fun.
Well, you know what? On the other side of the law, I can show you the original recorder's office.
Let's go see the recorder's office. Now, Kim, what is this? This is another wild room. You have all kinds of recording stuff.
Absolutely. Remember when you first started the tour with me, I said that there were 3 rooms that were still original to the courthouse, and one being the courtroom upstairs, and we just visited the jail, so that was an original room to the courthouse, and we're now standing in the original recorder's office. So as you look around this room, there's probably a lot of equipment, office equipment and recording equipment, legal equipment, that many people wouldn't recognize today because this was a long time before computers.
Well, this is like a scale.
Right. This is a scale for, could be used for many different things, but you can see the mechanism on the back here and the weight right there. And that's fascinating because I don't know how many people would readily, understand that that's a scale without, an explanation on it.
Well, it's awesome. And then here's one of my favorite. Look at this telephone. Check this out. Oh, that's awesome. And it has a crank.
It has a crank,
you talk into it. You see where many old movies that have something like this.
Now, we've gone from that down to a little flat handheld device that we just hold up to our ear, and it picks up a signal. And
all 3 of us have our cell phones with us.
But that was a modern telephone at the time it came out. That was something that people wouldn't have had. Everybody would not have had that in their home. You probably would have gone to a store or a business to use that or to receive a call.
Well, plus then it was a party line as well too.
Yes,
and you had an operator and like, it's just cool.
You didn't want to talk about anything too personal when you talked on a telephone like this.
Well, when I was a kid, I used to listen on the phone all the time. So I figured out what the neighbors were doing. Up to no good. Well, this is awesome. You have a safe in here. I
Yeah,
guess you use it as an office?
That was the original vault. We now use that as a museum staff office, but that was the original vault.
I actually had a desk like this in Michigan when I moved.
I would like to have a desk like that now. It has all the compartments. I could arrange things really interestingly in a desk like that. I love that.
And this looks like a copy machine to me.
Yes, you know, today we just print something out on our computer, or we have, some offices still have these big copiers that you could make mass copies. But this is more like, oh, when I was in junior high and grade school, we called it a ditto machine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this is how they made copies then. And again, at that time that this came out, this isn't something people would have had in their home. This is something that you would need to make lots of copies for court cases and a lot of legal copies.
Legal likes copies. And do not touch. Oh,
Yeah,
that's just asking for it.
Yeah, we don't touch. Well, and the reason, you know,
Well, it's not. It's from the 1920s.
Yeah, a lot of these artifacts are very delicate, and the fact that we have them today to show you and our guests in the museum is because somebody has taken very good care of them.
Well, this one says 1915.
1915, that was probably brand new at the time that they closed this courthouse and would have been moved over to, you know, to Minden, to the new courthouse there. So that would have been brand spanking new the last year that this courthouse was open.
Well, that's an early calculating machine. So
Yeah.
we've gone from a machine like that
to something, again, very
our cell
small.
phone.
To our cell phones, exactly. But this, you know, again, we have these things to show you because we take care of them, we don't allow people to handle them, and they're going to be here for another 100 years when we're gone. You know, so our children can see these things too.
Well, they have the county commissioners used to meet here.
Oh, absolutely.
1908.
Absolutely.
And so you have a lot of history pictures in here.
Yeah, we have some pictures on the wall, on the north wall, of a lot of the county recorders and the people that worked in this building. And when we go to the next room, we're going to see a little bit like what a schoolroom would have looked like here, because remember I told you for 40 years this functioned as a school. So we can see some of those photos too.
Now, like county commissioners has a female on it, so you don't see too many females. I wonder when the first female county commissioner was.
Well, thank you so much for pointing that out, because we, Douglas County had the first female county recorder in the state of Nevada. Frederick Klotz was a county recorder for several years, and when he became ill, his daughter Josephine took over for about a year. And after that year, her sister took over after her, and for a period of over 20 years, the Klotz family were county recorders. But they were the first women that were county recorders here in the state of Nevada.
Well, that's exciting.
So why don't we head on over to the school exhibit so you can get an idea of what this looked like when it was a school.
Last question. There's a picture of a gal at the very end. I can't see it from here. Is that the recorder you talked about for years?
No, actually, that's going to be part of the school exhibit.
Oh, then let's go.
Sure, let's go see it.
Well, Kim, someone took my chair.
They actually had those back in the day. But he probably got in trouble for using his slingshot there.
Yes, and I had those many times too. I got in trouble for having a slingshot. Didn't have to wear the hat, but I did experience the corner thing. Also, you have a maps from many countries probably in the world. And then the old desks have the inkwells. And all these old books, I swear my grandpa used to have them in his library because he was a teacher. And so you come here and see some of the things that
kind of like deja vu.
What molded me the way I am today.
Well, you know, and we do have people come visit the museum, our guests that visit the museum, that some people, you know, they kind of giggle and they say they remember desks somewhat like this. But this room that we're in here helps to portray what this building was used for when it was a school for 40 years. And it wasn't, you know, for between 40 years, that's a long span of time. So we didn't always have these desks and the older books and the dunce cap, but from 1916 till 1956, this was the Genoa Elementary School.
Well, it's awesome. It reminds me of Little House on the Prairie.
It does, especially with, you know, with our students and our teacher here next to the blackboard.
And the woodworking here is absolutely beautiful, and the light, and you got rocks there and more books than my grandfather had.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Well, you know, and everybody wasn't crammed into this one little room. It depended over the years upon how many students that they had here. Sometimes just upstairs in the courtroom was used as a schoolroom. Sometimes that was used as the auditorium. Sometimes they had 1 through 4 grades down here and 5 through 8 upstairs. They used different rooms down here at different times. It just depended on if there were a lot of students that year or, you know, if the student enrollment declined. But they did a lot of renovation inside of this museum when it was a school, and as I mentioned, you know, at one time the staircase, which we're going to go up in a few minutes,
oh, wow.
It was clear across the other side of the room. Some of the walls were taken up and put down, so it had a pretty active life, you know, as a school, and at this point has lasted almost longer as a school than it has any other function.
Well, the other museum was an old school.
Yeah,
as well.
it was a school. See, you know, I say here in Genoa, if we want a museum, we'll take over an old school and make it a museum.
Well, this building's absolutely beautiful, and they got the high ceilings. Now, how many kids did they have, or when did you have a school start here? Because this is the oldest settlement in Nevada.
Well, at the time that this was purchased for $150, you know, for a school, out of an auction,
yeah.
for the school, we had a one-room schoolhouse up 5th Street, which is the street right next door here. And that was at the top of 5th Street, and it was a one-room schoolhouse that was almost overflowing with children.
Wow.
So when they acquired this building, they were absolutely ecstatic because they were able to expand to actually divide the children up into grades. One thing that I found fascinating when I read the oral history of Arnold Trimmer, who was, you know, helped establish the Carson Valley Historical Society, and lived here almost all of his life. Moved here in 1909. He said that there were several days when there was work that needed to be done on the ranch because his family established Ranch 1 right over there on Genoa Lane. He said it was very common for his family and other ranching families that if there was work that needed to be done, you stayed home and you helped your parents with the ranch work, either bringing in the hay or doing something with the cattle, and then you had to make up your studies.
I would think so.
You were allowed, so there would be days that some kids would show up for school and a lot of kids wouldn't show up because they were ranch families. Yeah, so that's, you know, it's hard to say how many students, you know, attend a school. Now, you would not only be in the dunce chair, you'd be picked up by the, you know, the truant officer, you know, if you didn't show up for school.
Well, doing that hay, it takes a lot of work, so I imagine a lot of kids were working hard too, doing their studies.
Very much, yeah. I would have thought it would be fun to attend school here, and that's another thing. We still have people come in that remember when they were children here and went to school, and it's fun to have them kind of take us around and say, well, I remember, you know, this was our lunchroom, and this is where we hung our coats up, and you know, my first grade or second grade teacher taught out of this room.
Yeah, I love that too.
Would you like to go upstairs and see a little bit more of the museum, the original courtroom and Snowshoe Thompson's room?
Oh, sounds good.
Let's do that now.
I went upstairs in the courthouse, Kim, and this is echoey.
Yes,
and
it
it's
is.
absolutely beautiful. You said something while we were off camera about this desk. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, it is. It's, you know, and this quite is arguably the oldest artifact in that belonged to the courthouse in this courthouse museum. Now, upstairs here is, remember at the beginning of our tour, I mentioned that there were 3 rooms that were original to the courthouse, and here we are in the 3rd room. This is the courtroom, original courtroom. And as you look around the courtroom, the courthouse burned down in 1910. The walls were standing because they were brick, but everything else burned. And so there's not much here original to the courthouse prior to 1910, except the walls outside and a half-moon desk here.
It's beautiful.
You know, it's interesting how this desk was found because in 1969, when the Carson Valley Historical Society acquired this building and they made the decision that the museum would represent what the courthouse looked like, they got a hold of the blueprints and the manifest, and they were putting everything together. And Arnold Trimmer, who was the historian for Genoa and who was on the board of the Historical Society, he was in charge of going through the manifest and trying to put it back together to look at the courthouse. He came across this unique desk where the plaintiff and his attorney would have sat along next to the defendant and that person's attorney. And the way the desk was described, he thought, I've seen that desk. I know I have, okay? It was out back of a government building in Minden or Gardnerville at the time, and it was in quite disrepair, so he got a hold of it and they restored it, and so therefore, this is the only item in this courthouse that was in this courthouse in 1865, because shortly before the fire, for whatever reason, this desk was removed from the courthouse and therefore didn't burn in the 1910
It's one lucky desk.
It's a very lucky desk. So you do get to see something that existed in the courthouse prior to the 1910 fire.
Well, you got the dream chairs, and you got the all this old clocks and landscapes and government things.
Oh, this is fun. And, you know, actually, the bench and they were remodeling it, and that was around the time in 1916 when we were setting up this museum. So
That's
it's very
fantastic.
because this is basically what it would have looked like when it was a courtroom. This is basically the setup. Now you might notice something interesting. Notice how the witness's chair is on the opposite side of where the jury is sitting.
I noticed that.
And some people think, they come in here and they think that, well, whoever did the exhibit didn't know what they were doing and they ended up putting it on the wrong side. No, at that time, when this was a courthouse, that is how, that was the setup. Is they had the witness chair over here and the jury sat over here.
So they wouldn't hurt the witness?
I have no idea why that setup was, but this is the authentic setup of this courtroom. And you know, there were a lot of cases that were heard in this courtroom. You know, there was divorces, claim jumping, there were marriages here in this courtroom,
All right.
and divorces. But something that was very prominent over and over again were water right issues that were argued here.
Still are.
So if these walls echo with anything, they echo with those heated arguments and those cases that were heard before the judge. Now, this courtroom wasn't used, you know, 5 days a week, 4 weeks out of a month. In those days, the judge's circuit was quite large, so they actually only met 2 times a month. So if you were downstairs in jail and you were waiting for your case to come up, you might have a couple of weeks in jail before your case even came up before the judge.
So that's where time served came in.
Time served. Exactly.
Well, I like that one little tidbit, Fred Settlemire. That was his desk in the...
That's his desk right there, yes.
So a little local history, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we still have the Settlemires in government as well.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan.
And again, just like downstairs in the jail area, we do utilize our space as best as we can here in the museum. So out here probably would have been where people could have sat to hear the cases going on before them. But what we utilize the space now is for more exhibit space. So here we have a couple of cases that you can look up the history and some of the artifacts and the background on the artifacts that are here in the museum. So we have some kind of mini exhibits going on.
Well, you have an exhibit of historic maps of Nevada.
Absolutely. This area changes annually. So whatever our big exhibit for the year is, we portray over here. And this year it's historic maps of Nevada. And Mr. Hawkins here was actually one of the surveyors, and he was a prominent surveyor here. And he was raised in Genoa, so you can not only see the maps of Genoa starting in, or excuse me, of Nevada starting in 1852 all the way through present, but you can learn a little bit about what a surveyor did at the time. You can see some of his tools. So this
survey sets?
So this exhibit will be up through the closing of this museum for this year, and then when you come next year, you're going to get to see a brand new exhibit. So I don't know what
behind this is parts of some candy dance, some old newspapers.
Well, that's another thing. I don't know if Danny wants to come over here and focus on a couple of portraits that we have on the wall over here. But one of the first judge to sit on the bench here in the courthouse was Judge Daniel Webster Virgin. And this is his wife, Mary. And he was his daughter, oddly enough, in 1919 that was responsible for putting together the very first candy dance.
All right.
So the story, and they lived in the Pink House, so if anybody comes to town and they're familiar with this giant pink Victorian on the corner of Genoa Lane and Main Street, that was Mr. Virgin's house. But anyway, their daughter, Lillian, they had 3 children. 2 children died early in adulthood, and Lillian was the only one to actually marry. She married a wealthy Tonopah miner, and a lot of times they lived out in Tonopah, but they liked to stay here. Well, eventually, over the years, Lillian's mother passed away, and Lillian's husband passed away. And she wasn't married very long to him. He kind of was always not very well. And so he died a young man. So Lillian moved back in with her father, and by that time he had retired from being a judge and a district attorney, but people in the valley still came to him. He was very smart, very well respected, and they said in front of his house there would be wagons and buggies and horses like all day long. So anyway, she moved back in with him. She was also very well respected. She was the person that people came into town for when they had fundraising ideas or funds were needed to be raised. She was kind of like her father's right hand. So naturally, when electricity came to Genoa, and people were in want of street lights because they didn't have electric street lights. Well, money was going to have to be raised for that. You didn't just, you know, they weren't just handed to you. And we were a small town. So the women of the town came to Lillian and they said, can you come up with an idea for a fundraiser? And she remembered she'd been on a cruise with her husband when he was alive, a riverboat cruise where they had a dinner and a dance and they passed out homemade candy, which was actually a delicacy. So she went to her aunt, Jane Raycraft Campbell, who was actually proprietress of the local Raycraft Hotel, which was the big hotel in town, and said, what about if we have all the women in town make some candy, and then we have a beautiful midnight supper over here at the Raycraft Hotel, and then we can go across the way over to the Raycraft Dance Hall, which is now the town hall, and have a dance. Everybody thought that was a great idea. They were so successful the first year that they raised enough money for 3 street lights.
All right.
And they were very proud of themselves. And then they thought, oh, we have to keep these street lights lit. So they decided to do the same fundraiser over the next year, and that became the fundraiser to raise enough money for the electricity for the streetlights and to purchase more streetlights. There's still 9 in existence today. I don't know how many there were originally, but there's 9 in existence today. But anyway, it just morphed into an annual fundraiser. It wasn't until the 1970s that it became a crafts fair, and the very first crafts fair was on Stephen Kinsey's front lawn. And that was in 1974, and then it moved to the parks, and now anybody who just came here the last weekend of September, which it always is the last weekend of September, it's 2 days, and you would have noticed several thousand people in town.
It was very successful. So, the town thanks you if you came.
Yeah, and so this was the 92nd annual Candy Dance.
Yes, and it was very successful, and so thank you all.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for coming out for it. But that's the story behind the Candy Dance for folks that didn't know. And then over here, yeah, we have some posters from over the years, and you can see how kind of the posters change from year to year, and the themes change. So that's the exhibit on this side of the annual.
How sweet it was. 2-day arts and crafts fair in Genoa.
And we had, for years, actually in the antique shop that I work in, that belongs to my friend, they have a couple of the earlier posters. And actually the posters weren't decorative back in the 1920s, 1930s, because the Candy Dance started in 1919, if I didn't mention that. And they weren't decorative, they were just, you know, they had the information on them, and they said the last weekend, or the last Saturday of September, but you could add the price or the date on it each year after it was printed.
Well, now they're collectible items.
Yeah, now they're collectible items. They sell them, actually,
I collect them myself, and they're very nice, well done. Artists compete for the honor.
They do, absolutely, yeah. So that's kind of how the posters morphed over the years, too.
Well, then the other side, you have all the history.
Yeah, and this is the history of the Carson Valley on the wall to the left over here. Maybe Annie can zoom in on that.
Ballot boxes.
And so, yes, we used this wall over here to help people understand how the Carson Valley and Genoa kind of came into existence. And here are some of our founding fathers of the town here. As I mentioned, the courthouse was built in 1865 from bricks kiln just a mile down the road at the Adams Ranch. And here's Rufus and Quincy Adams, and they were responsible for building this courthouse and other buildings in town. And then the Hawkins family, Theodore Perry Hawkins, was a relief rider for the Pony Express.
Oh, wow.
He lived here in town. That's when he was 17, but he grew up to be a prominent member of this town. And Sarah Jane Kinsey was Stephen Kinsey's wife. And Stephen Kinsey was one of the 2 founders of this town. And then here we have John Reese, he was the other founder of the town, and some of his family members.
Wow.
So we're lucky to have these photographs to be able to show. Now, speaking of photographs,
I love photographs.
when we go out in the hall, I can show you some more of our founding fathers of Genoa and the Carson Valley.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, tell me about all these people. I recognize a lot of them, actually.
Well, yeah, there's some very famous names here, and these people were our founding fathers and very important people to Genoa and to the Carson Valley. And so we're, you know, while this isn't a giant exhibit, it is important that we do have, we're able to have their photos here so that we can explain who they are. I mean, who hasn't heard of Henry Van Sickle?
Yes.
Yeah, he has a couple ranches down here, and he was a blacksmith by trade, and actually had land here in Genoa, and he had a townhouse in Genoa.
Oh, wow.
But David R. Jones, he was one of our founding fathers, one of the very first people to come to Genoa with a Mormon settlement. Here's a few gentlemen. George Smith and A.C. Pratt were early newspapermen here in the Valley. A.C.
Wow.
Pratt founded the Carson Valley News. George Smith purchased it from him. George Smith at the time had the Genoa Courier.
Wow. I used to be a newspaper man myself.
Well, yes, and then after he had the Genoa Courier and he acquired the Carson Valley News, he then changed the name of the paper and it became the Record Courier.
All right.
And it's still in operation today over in Gardnerville.
Excellent.
And then we have some other very important people, the Walkers here. The town historian, Billie Jean Reitmeyer, she is a fourth generation descendant of the Walker family. So this is her family right here. But you know what? Speaking of founding members of Genoa, we had a post office from the very get-go, but a lot of the founding members of Genoa wore the hat of postmaster, and we have a room here dedicated to them. Would you like to go in here and see?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's a very small room, but that doesn't mean it's not important. But in this room, we have one of the very first post offices, and it's a post office front, actually. Because not many people had their own boxes, you see. You had your own box if you were wealthy. Otherwise, it was general delivery. So in those days, stamps cost 3 cents, and many of the letters that you saw in those days might be addressed to Judge Virgin, Genoa. Didn't have to have an address, didn't have to have a zip code. People knew where Genoa was, and Judge Virgin got his mail.
Excellent.
But E.F. Barnard was our first postmaster, and he was one of the first settlers here. He wore different hats. I mean, he was involved in government here too, but he was first postmaster. Stephen Kinsey, the original settler of Moreland Station, he was our fifth postmaster. Colonel John Reese was a postmaster. I mean, there weren't that many people in town, so you had to have different jobs.
Well, this reminds me of my friend and fraternity brother in a small town in Pennsylvania. He took us home to get us fed from his mom. His mom's worried about us not eating enough in college.
That's moms for you.
But half the house was divided into a post office, and the other half was their living quarters. So behind here would be where the kitchen was.
Right. Well,
and this is just, I thought, oh, I'm back in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this is deja vu for you.
Yes, so I could see that Genoa would have the same situation.
Well, now, interesting that you mentioned that, because that was the history of the post office here until the 1970s. Basically, if you were elected postmaster, this post office went to your home or your place of business. If you had a place of business, you also operated the post office out of that place of business. Okay. Now, we had a home on Mill Street. We have a picture of it here. Right? Oh, a home on Mill Street that still stands today. At one time, Jenny Feddick was the postmistress here. Now, she just before she moved the post office back to here, she had a little building that was originally a pharmacy on Main Street, but in 1941 it caught fire and burned down. The only thing they saved from that building was this post office right here.
Yes,
so this went back to her house, yeah, and then she operated the post office out of this side of the house. But finally, in the mid-1970s, a building was moved to town and put on the corner of Genoa Lane and Main Street. It's where the Genoa Country Store is right now. And then the long one-story section, that was the post office. And that was probably the first time that the post office operated out of its own building. And it didn't function as something else, or it wasn't in somebody's home. And now we have a beautiful post office on the south end of town that it's filled with people from Genoa Lakes and everybody that lives in Genoa, because we don't get home delivery here in Genoa. It's all post office delivery. But no, the history of the post office here in Genoa it's fun because it's just that small town. Mrs. Feddick was the one who was the postmistress for these few years, and then somebody else took it over the next year. So it's a lot of fun for me. I enjoy the history of the post office.
Well, being from a small town myself, I kind of feel like I'm home.
Yeah, you get it. Now, speaking of homes, would you like to see what a parlor would have looked like in a fancier home?
Sure.
Okay, well, let's go see that now.
Okay. Kim, this is pretty nice in here. You have some beautiful glassware, but you have a lot of dolls.
Oh, we do. We have a wonderful doll collection.
I had 2 sisters, and my sisters at a young age would have loved this room.
Well, and this is a nice attraction for the younger girls that come, because they get to see a nice variety of beautiful dolls that were from, different eras over the century. And you'll notice in this room there's a beautiful bed, and it's not a doll bed. Actually, it's a child's bed, and it was donated to the museum, to the Historical Society, from the very famous Dangberg family.
It's really nice.
And it's very ornate. I know when I was a child, I didn't have a bed that fancy.
Even the smaller chairs are nice.
And look at that. Look at the attention to detail for the children's toys, not just the dolls. But, you know, today, somebody like me, I would be afraid to touch those dolls. They look so delicate. But children, you know, did play with those dolls when you know, back 100 years ago. And I think they probably treated their toys a little bit better, because if a toy broke, it would have to be repaired. And they didn't have that many toys. You didn't just go off to Walmart and buy a new one. So I think that little girls, even though a lot of dolls were porcelain or paper mache, I think they took care of their dolls probably better than children might take care of things today, even though they were so delicate. But no, this is a very popular place for the little girls to come when they visit.
Well, you also have 2 buggies in here that are really
and
beautiful.
They are, and this would have been for children. Now, I know today it probably would have been recalled, because if a child fell out of it, then the manufacturer would have had to recall it.
Well, with all the construction, this probably would have survived Tahoe this summer.
Yeah. Well, now as you look around this room here, you'll notice, and I think it's interesting that we put the children's doll room just outside a room where children would not be allowed to be in at any given time.
Some pretty nice furniture.
Yeah, this room was for adults. Children didn't play in a room like this. That's not to say that they weren't allowed to come in here from time to time, but they certainly wouldn't have spent a lot of time or played in here. But as you look around the room, you'll see a lot of Victorian furnishings. The lace curtains that you see on the windows actually came out of the historic Pink House. They belong to the Virgin family. So this is a nice representation of the Victorian times, where somebody who was a little bit wealthier than the average person would have had their home furnished like this.
Does the organ work?
That I'm not allowed to play it, so I wouldn't know.
I'm always curious. My
Yeah,
mother-in-law has an old antique organ.
Oh.
And she made sure it works, and it's beautiful sounding.
Yeah, and this very well could work, but we don't play it.
And all the glass here reminds me of my grandfather's house. It was absolutely, he had a collection of glass. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's worth coming here just for the glass work and the dolls.
I think so
this
too.
room by itself is worth coming to see the museum. And then the other one's another doll.
A buggy from another area.
And that one has the roof for, like today it's snowing, so I can take it in Tahoe.
Yeah, if you had to leave the house, you had to bundle the child up. But yeah, and so this room, while we're displaying, representing our exhibit represents what a parlor would look like. When this was a courthouse, this room was the jury deliberation room.
Okay.
When it was a school, this was the hot lunch room.
Oh, wow.
And it would have functioned as other things, I'm sure, off and on over the course of when it was a school, but one of the main things that I remember is this was a hot lunchroom.
Well, you also have some antique law books.
Oh,
They
sure.
really fired a lot of bullets in here.
Yeah, Judge Virgin probably could have used books like this too.
Right.
But you know, I was going to say, this being the hot lunchroom, would you want to see where they prepared the meals for the kids when it was a school?
Sure.
Okay, let's go over to that room then.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And the kitchen here, I guess it was a school's kitchen?
When it was a school, this room did function as a kitchen, and the exhibit has been expanded now to this point to show you kind of what a kitchen would have looked like and some of the modern conveniences people would have had at one time or another.
You almost smell the tapioca in here. I swear, I smell tapioca.
Yeah,
It's absolutely beautiful.
Probably not many people enjoy ironing, but I think ironing is an easier chore now than it would have been back then when you had to heat these irons up and keep switching them off, you know, and use the hot one after one got cold, and things, you know, like this was I'm sure at one point when a woman acquired this washing machine, she probably was very excited because it meant that she wasn't scrubbing on her clothes on a washboard. But we look at this today and we say, oh my gosh, you know, who would have wanted to do laundry then? But here's what at one point became a modern refrigerator. Before that, they might have had an ice box where they had ice delivered, and all of a sudden they have an electric Frigidaire.
Oh, wow.
So I try to keep in mind that these items here made life a lot easier for women at one point or another when they had something else that, you know, they had to take their rugs outside and beat them. And then eventually they were able to get, you know, a vacuum cleaner.
Well, we don't know how spoiled we really are.
Oh,
Until you see something like this, because I'm looking at the soap here, I'm distracted by it for some reason. Oh, who knows what that would have been inside
Yeah,
that? And
yeah.
your skin would probably been itchy. Oh, I don't know.
Oh yeah, now we have products for sensitive skin and products for all kinds of different, you know, skin types and ways to protect our skin with different lotions. But these types of exhibits in a museum always bring things back to me about, like you said, how lucky we are.
Reminds me of 6th grade in Tulsa. It's the same room.
Yeah, it's about the same size.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this room would have been used for making the hot lunches for the children.
The cookie cutters and, you know, the
Yeah,
rolling pin.
Yeah, who even bothers these days? We go to the store and buy a pie crust that's ready made. And
we're actually making an apple pie right now as we speak and not using that.
Hey, not using it. Well, and I'll tell you also, a lot of times just for convenience sake, we might, you know, buy something from the store. But when we do have a friend or a mother or a relative that makes things from scratch, that makes it that much more special because people don't do that anymore.
It's definitely better.
Yeah, because we're just too busy these days. I usually just buy a box of crackers and cheese and say, I brought the appetizer.
Actually, that works too.
And I know I know that this is on camera now, but everybody that knows me knows that's how I am. But I sure can appreciate homemade things. So.
Well, I tell you, it actually reminds me when I was a kid a lot. Again, for some reason, a lot of these items are my grandma had a machine.
Yeah,
it stood up, but it was probably not too much older than that one.
Well, even I remember seeing a lot of these things in my grandmother's house.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we have one last exhibit that's really special to show you. And if you're ready, I want to introduce you to the Mailman of the Sierra.
Sounds good. Let's check out the Mailman of the Sierra. Now, this has to be one of my favorite people, Snowshoes, like the legend. When I first moved here, my girlfriend was telling me about Snowshoe, and I just couldn't believe it. And the more I studied it, the more these deeds come true, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And now I can see why he's such a legend. This is a room that looks like you guys have donated in his honor.
Oh yes, this room, well, we've had this room set up in his honor for several years, and it was just redone, refreshed, given a facelift last year. And so what you'll see when you come to this room is actually what looks like the interior of his cabin that was out in Diamond Valley. But Snowshoe Thompson was referred to as the Mailman of the Sierra. He was born in Norway, moved to the United States with his mother and a brother and a few siblings when he was 10 years old. But when he grew up after his mother passed away, he, like many pioneers, went to the gold fields of California expecting to get rich, you know, expecting to reach down on the ground and pick up a nugget of gold and be rich. And he, like 90% of the rest of the people, never really became rich by being a miner, and he kind of caught on real quick that that wasn't going to be the life for him. So
yes, we're doing all this history. I haven't found anybody who's rich from the mining.
No, there weren't many. No, you know, they became rich like Levi Strauss by selling things to the miners. Now, he bought a little farm close to Placerville, and in 1856, which is still, to this day on record, one of the worst winters in the Sierra Nevada,
oh, wow.
He answered an ad in the newspaper in the Sacramento Union looking for anybody who could figure out any way to get messages and mail out to Genoa. It said Genoa, cut off from the world. Now, if you think about it, yeah, we're in the Carson Valley, but all of our supplies came from San Francisco via Sacramento through Placerville and up over the Johnson Road.
It was actually tough in a car.
Oh, sure. So he thought, oh, well, you know, when I was a kid in Norway, we got around on what they called snow skates or snowshoes without any problem. And he said if I could replicate those, I could probably take on this job. And he did just that. He cut down a couple trees and fashioned two 10-foot long snow shoes or skates. We call them skis, but ski is the word for shoe in Norwegian. And he tried them out and they worked, and so he applied for the job, and for the next 20 years, he carried the mail over the Sierra in the worst weather when a sleigh or a wagon couldn't get through. And he was never lost, and he was scared only once when he encountered a pack of wolves, and he skied literally right through them, and they didn't chase him. So he wasn't worried about that. He rescued so many people. There's a couple of famous accounts of people that he rescued. He would get supplies for people, so he would carry more than just mail. Like he would get chimney lamps for people when he went to Placerville. He at times could carry about 100 pounds on his back. He never wore more than a heavy jacket like you see in this drawing here. and a hat, and he had a pole for balance. He would take maybe beef jerky or hardtack in his pocket, and he would drink melted snow water, so he didn't carry a lot on him. Now it took 3 days to get from Placerville to here, and 2 days to get back, and that's because of the grade coming over. He eventually married Agnes Singleton, and he had a little farm out in Diamond Valley, which is just below Woodford's, and he became more associated as a citizen here in Genoa. He was a very beloved citizen here in Genoa. Now people would pay him individually to carry their mail, so it wasn't that he was never paid, but he carried the government mail, and he was never paid by the government. And in 1876, the last year of his life, he did take a trip to Washington to try to recoup some of the money that he figured was owed to him. And they were very appreciative of everything he'd done for the 20 years, but because he did not have ink on a paper contract, they said,
did not
"We're
sign
sorry,
on the dotted line?
we can't
Sorry."
pay you." So he came back very disappointed. But he was working on his farm one day, and he became ill and went inside to lay down for the afternoon, and he never left his bed after that. It is said that he died from complications of pneumonia, but 2 years after his death, they found out basically what the effects of appendicitis were, and his symptoms were parallel to that, so actually he actually died from appendicitis. But because he was such a beloved citizen, his funeral was held right here in this courthouse.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I used to work in downtown Genoa, which is a little square over here.
Yes.
There's a museum, there's a statue right across the street from where I worked, and I took pictures of a lot of tourists from all over the world. So he's known all over the world.
All over the world. The 1960 Norwegian ski team, when they came to Squaw Valley for the Olympics, they came down here to Genoa to lay a wreath and a plaque on his grave. And he's buried just a half a mile away from here in the Genoa Cemetery. People can visit his grave. They can come visit this room and learn even more about him. And then they can go visit his grave at the cemetery. So what better way to end this tour with the mailman of the Sierra?
I think we're out of time, so thank you, Kim.
Well, thank you, Michael, for coming and visiting our museum, and I hope that this was enjoyable for everybody, and it'll just make them want to come see it in person.
Well, I love this place. It's been Michael Smith and Kim Copel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.